Gentlemen, thank you. Welcome. Appreciate you being here. I would love to start by just a brief background. Rather than me reading, I'm going to let you guys tell the story. So, since your mouth's full, we'll start with you. Mark, yeah. Neil, can we start with you, buddy? Thanks.
Neil Alston. I'm in venture capital with some Christian partners investing in early stage startups. I was at Google for many years on their finance team doing investment and deal reviews, making sure Eric Schmidt didn't go to jail, which he did not. And then I did a startup called Abide Christian Meditation after that and sold that 3 years ago.
Cool.
My name is Ben Coleman. Started my career in the U.S. Navy, always had a passion for flying and service to our country, and came to VC very circuitously. I helped build a lot of the early infrastructure between the Defense Department and Silicon Valley back in the early 2010s. I helped set up a group called the Defense Innovation Unit and another one called the Defense Innovation Board in the Pentagon. Ran a failed startup, so a lot of lessons learned there, and then I've been doing early stage national security, industrial, and energy infrastructure investments for the past 2 years.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
I haven't had as adventurous a life as Ben and Neil, but I was a corporate guy for 20 years, and my last role there was starting up and leading the corporate venture capital arm of Eastman Chemical Company. Transitioned into kind of a freelancer, and for the last 15 years I've been doing a mix of consulting back to corporations on innovation in general and corporate VC in particular, best practices. Also being an advisor to startups and an angel investor. And we're going to talk about how I've morphed into the faith-driven side of the in angel investing since that time. My wife and I are involved with our church and lots of different Christian ministries at the advisory role, including Jessup. And happy to be here.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you guys. So we've had an email exchange sort of getting ready for this. We talked about some questions, and Ben kindly, more than kindly, implied that my questions were too polite and too nice. And so we're going to go spicy on the questions. We're going to address some stuff here. So first, to start with, why even bother adding the term Christian to investor? Why not just investor? Put money in, get money out, make it on behalf of other people. And I'm not going to go in order. I'm not going to pick. You guys, as you feel called to answer, go ahead.
I'm not sure we should add the word Christian to investor. You certainly can have that thesis, and some do, and I think it's certainly appropriate. But I think we have to acknowledge that any worldview we hold is going to inform all our decisions, including investment decisions. And at Cubit in particular, we're called Cubit for a reason. Cubit is the unit of measure from the Old Testament, as many of you are familiar with. We're always being measured by our Creator. And we invest in a lot of companies that are not led by Christians, and one might from the outside view as very secular. But when we make investment decisions, we are all rooted in our faith and what we believe the Lord has in store for the future and what it means to drive human flourishing. And so we approach a faith-driven investing mindset from the center of what do we believe about how we want humanity to move forward. And this really gets us into the national security, industrials, and energy space, where, let's sort of energy first. Energy is the foundation and the currency of all human flourishing. Everything we do takes some sort of energy. Cheap, clean, abundant energy will drive human flourishing, and so we want to be a part of that. National security, Trey talked about this. This can be controversial, and 2,000 years of Christian philosophers have debated this back and forth. But without a protective measure to minimize downside risk, you can't then get a flourishing society to have freedom of speech, to have freedom of vocation, to have abundant energy to drive all the things that we take advantage of. And industrials, I think we're seeing the importance of supply chain resiliency in America, especially to ensure that America, as an entity in and of itself, which I would also contend has driven a lot of Christian positive things in world society, it's critical to have that resiliency here. So as we think about our theses, the underlying foundation really is our faith and how we view the world emerging.
Neil or Mark?
Yeah, sure. I think another approach, I like what you said there, Ben, a lot, is to think like if we truly believe that God is omniscient, all-powerful, created this universe, is the source of wisdom, then if you take that as your first principles, that there's wisdom out there that's greater than us and beyond us and is mysterious, if you want the best investment thesis on things that will give returns, why would you not start there from the principles that God has laid out that work? And then part of the question with FDI that always comes in, are you investing for financial ROI or spiritual impact or some combination of the two, and you can allocate across those. So on some level, I think not tapping into the truth that God has given us about what works. And one example of this is I believe humanity's fallen. And humanity will always use technology for both good and bad things. So one of our core theses at One Flourish is going to the national security thing. There will be bad actors who will try to cause mayhem, and we want to invest in trust and security because we think those will increasingly be necessary for the world to flourish and thrive. And that comes out of my worldview of being a believer. So I think that you can, if God truly knows where this is going, then I think there's some wisdom to be had there for us to invest more wisely.
Yeah, I started out on the angel investing side looking for impact investing in particular. But it was more secular driven. It was more medical devices to help people improve their lives or save lives. That's where I found impact. Since the FDI movement has kind of emerged in the last 4 or 5 years, I've got to learn about broadening that impact or narrowing it, however you want to look at it, into kingdom impact. So I'm looking for deals that have several characteristics for me to feel like I'm making a kingdom impact or contributing to kingdom impact. And one of those is an entrepreneur who a faith-driven entrepreneur. And a faith entrepreneur to me is someone that is trying to instill their Christian worldview and values into the business itself and integrate faith and work. One that is looking to influence their ecosystem and be a light to others in the secular side of society. And then ultimately, if we can find it, some kind of kingdom impact itself into serving others and helping society and something that Jesus might do to help others. So I tend to look for that intersection and then layer on top of that the potential for financial return that can recycle and regenerate opportunities for further investment and further nonprofit contribution.
Fantastic, thank you. So let me extend on what you just said, Mark, and maybe Ben and Neil, if you could answer this. What do you look for in a founder, right? Or maybe what do you look for in a founder / deal that you're considering investing in, right?
I think that's me.
We want to, yeah, I think it is. You guys want to? Perfect. Okay.
I'll hold my antenna.
Okay.
Right, coming to the rescue.
Oh. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
I think this is okay now. It was
You
in
got
my
it
pocket.
okay?
Yeah.
I'll keep this up here.
Good backup.
I can start.
Yeah, go for it.
I think startup founder fit or market founder fit is really important. And I think in all the segments, you want some deep level of understanding of the problem they're solving, and do they really appreciate the customer? But I think on a personal level, especially in the early stages, and we do a lot of seed and Series A investing, so kind of right when the company's turning their growth curve and there's some traction, it's determination and tenacity. And is this person going to run through walls to win? And I think one of the things we've debated internally is if we looked at the past, say, 20 or 25 years of the most successful companies, and the archetype of individual who has run those companies, whether it's Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Elon Musk, there's a bit of a tension in terms of the type of leadership that we thrive under and the type of leadership it takes to build a world-changing company. And you look at the biographies of some of these gentlemen, things are not great in those organizations. And yet there's something about their approach that breaks through whatever barriers are in place. And we have a founder that I'm very fond of, but he's very aggressive, and we debated internally, is this the type of founder we want to back because of other things we believe about how people should be treated? And so, to be honest, that's a deep tension that we face as we look at what success actually looks like and what kind of environment and culture that creates.
Thank you, Ben. Neil, you want to?
Yeah, And we do tech investing, so there's obviously got to be an element of tech innovation in there. That's sort of table stakes on it. And what you mentioned about founder aggressiveness, tenacity, we actually have a set of cultural principles that we invest in. We look for founders who not only have the domain expertise in the go-to-market and the problem space, but also have integrity, accountability, transparency, interestingly enough, humility. There's a difference between being aggressive and being humble. Being humble is when you can admit that you're wrong about something. And when you're founding a company, half of what you're doing is always wrong. You don't know which half. And if you're not aggressively figuring out what half, and I mean, I would challenge to extend that to all of us in our lives. Very often, half of what we're doing is a wrong time, wrong place, not a good opportunity, a waste of time. And how do you figure that out? So I'm always looking for founders who have discovered things about their market and problem that nobody else in the world knows because they're more curious and willing to learn faster than everybody else. And if the first time, I ask them their values one. If they don't have values, forget it. But that one, because if somebody can tell you that in the last 2 weeks they've discovered 3 interesting things about the market that somebody else knows, and if they keep accelerating that direction, their learning curve is going to put them light years ahead of everybody else if they have the tenacity and everything. So I think that curiosity, that humble curiosity is probably, and by humble again, it doesn't mean don't be aggressive and don't try to win. It just means know that you're not God and you're not right about everything. And your job is to figure out how to make it right. That's probably about the single most important one.
Yeah.
So then, sorry, do you want to keep going? Sorry.
Just kind of agree with everything that was said there. And I think there is personality characteristics you're looking for, not just with the founder, but if they've established a team, the culture and the dynamic, and making sure there's alignment of all that internally. I come in really early, like pre-seed, one of the first, if not the first, non-friend and family investor, before institutional investors, and many times in one of the first angels. So it's usually very early in the development, so there's not a lot of history to look at as far as traction in the market or anything like that. So team is very critical. And are they committed to that culture? The resilience, the humble confidence that Neil talked about are all important. And the other thing for me is I tend to be very involved, and I end up being a coach, a mentor, a strategic advisor, an encourager, and sometimes a therapist for these folks at that stage, because it is a very, it's a very up and down roller coaster type of life when you get great highs and lows, and managing through that is very important. So coachability is also key. Do they listen to advice and take it under consideration? That doesn't mean they do everything you suggest. That just means they really consider it. Those kind of characteristics are critical, and we're talking about soft skills here, not hard skills.
Yeah. Can I riff on something Neil said?
Please, Ben.
So something I've been thinking about as you look at the pantheon of exceptional founders, I have not found many out Christians. Now, there certainly are some. Trey is one of them. But I've always wondered, like, why is that? And to your point about the willingness to be humble and admit when you're wrong, and I thought about this as I was thinking about my journey as a CEO and entrepreneur, was growing up in the church, there was a moral component to having a wrong answer or doing something wrong. And an entrepreneur has to be willing to make a bet and be willing to be wrong. And so I don't know if this is right, and it hasn't fleshed out, but I can't help but think that there is a correlation between growing up in the church and being risk averse to getting things wrong for a moral downside, and then trying to be an entrepreneur and realizing that most of your decisions are going to be wrong. You have to then fix those and being comfortable with that, because in my mindset, I was raised where if I made a mistake, whether it was said or not, that was a moral failing. Avoid mistakes. And if you're an entrepreneur, your job is to make mistakes and learn fast and iterate. And one of the things I would exhort the church to think about is, one, we should have those strong moral frameworks. We should hold people accountable. But what is the right way to think about trying and experimentation and encourage failure as not a moral wrong if it truly is not intentional, but as an opportunity to grow and encourage that. And if we did that, would that allow more Christians to be entrepreneurs because they didn't have this burden of feeling like they were letting God down by not getting everything right in the first place? And the best Christian founders I've found have not had that roadblock. I know I experienced, so I imagine others might have had that thought.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you maybe
Yeah.
the flip side of that coin, because I think many would agree that there is sometimes, often, a unique relationship between the church and money, or Christians and money, particularly lots of money. Is there a role that might also play, to your point, and open to everybody? Ben, of course, directed at you first, but if either the three of you, because I just wonder if there's a part of that that's like, ooh,
I have strong opinions, but I want these guys to lean in on that question first.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Before that, though, I kind of want to riff on what Ben said, is that I've lived a very alternative life as a Christian. I am a charismatic evangelical Catholic. Go find more of them, okay?
Somebody plug that into ChatGPT.
See how many of those you can find out in the world. But I think that in some ways that's always put me at attention with the church. And when I went to Launch Abide, I'll give you some very concrete stories here. I went to Launch Abide, and it was originally going to be a prayer app. We were going to have people pray for each other. You have no idea how many critiques I got from pastors who said, you shouldn't do this, you can't use a phone to pray, you can't pray for other people and share that you prayed for them, you're supposed to go in a closet to pray for people. Have you read the Bible? And I was like, you can say all those things, but that doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit isn't there, God's word isn't true, and prayer can't happen through a phone. And I literally ran so many experiments that I think pastors would have found offensive. And I found a lot of interesting findings out of that. Some were awesome, some were sad, but it was very counter what the church was looking for, because I was operating outside the parameters of what was normal. And sleep was one of the biggest ones. We saw this spike that at between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., we had this weird spike. It was morning and then night. We had meditations. I'm like, why are people listening to meditations at 1 o'clock in the morning? They couldn't sleep. And so I had to literally go out. My content director and I had to part ways because he was not a fan of this. I wrote a theology of sleep and realized that sleep is not of the fallen order. Jesus slept, right? You can have spiritual attack and a bunch of spiritual reasons you're not sleeping. And as a matter of fact, David said he prayed through the watches of the night. What happened? People used to read scripture before they went to bed. We stopped. And when this worked, the funny thing is it worked. Our YouTube channel spiked. You can go look at Abide Sleep channel. It's got 1.5 million followers, puts to sleep 100,000 people every night. I went for 3 years and told everybody I knew in Christian tech that sleep was the bomb and YouVersion, everyone needed to do more, and none of them did it. They're like, that's not a thing. You can't put people to sleep with the Bible. You preach the Bible. But the reality is God's word is always relevant. And so I think that there can be a very that's not the way it's done mentality in the church. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes that's right. Maybe marriage, some others, we can talk about areas where maybe the church really gets it right. So you want to be careful. But I do agree with you that you got to push the envelope of what is going to be possible if you're going to found something. Because if you're not pushing the envelope and you're not going to build $1 billion business.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Cool. Mark, what do you think? Is this potentially, or maybe even established, uncomfortable relationship between the church and money? Is that an inhibitor to Christian founders? To Ben's question about why we don't have more Trey Stevens out there in the world?
I think it's more societal pressure than it is church concern with being out, so to speak, and feeling that the whole separation of church and state mindset, what's culturally acceptable, those kind of things I think are bigger than the church pushing back on money, so to speak. I think pastors are always raising money, non-for-profits are always raising money, and if you can channel money to the church and they understand the bigger picture of wealth creation and how that results in the funding of the church, those are the churches that I think are embracing that and embracing their members to try to encourage generosity and stewardship, and educating on all of that can help the church thrive. And depending on whether you're talking about the big C or little c church.
Yep, great. Ben?
My view is probably going to be a little bit controversial. I think profit is good. And I don't mean it in the Gordon Gekko way of profit being good. But if you, and this is not 100%, this is like 60 to 80%, and I'll also say this is my personal opinion, nothing to do with my organization. We've had debates internally. But if you are able to deliver a product that people are willingly handing over hard-earned dollars and do so at a lower cost, you are providing net benefit to society and people, just as a broad stroke. This is the exact free market capitalist system we thrive within. Combined with that is, I think, this societal, I'll call it misalignment, you can debate that, but it goes to your comment, of like, the end of wealth in Christian circles is to be a philanthropist. I would contend that the broader human flourishing, and I would even probably contend better route to then driving more souls, is the end state of wealth should be to fund more companies. Because if a company is profitable and works, it goes back to that core principle of driving value for people. There are some exceptional nonprofits. We should tithe. I'm not saying this. But most nonprofits are absolute money sinks. They do not deliver what they say they're going to deliver. They are not held accountable. Market forces are a powerful incentive to drive efficiency and drive customer-facing results. And if the company can't do that, it dies and goes away. Many nonprofits don't do that. They survive to support their own ends, not delivering results. So if you are a Christian entrepreneur and are, through God's grace, able to build a great company and amass an immense amount of wealth, you should be a good steward of that. You should give to your church. You should give to mission-aligned nonprofits. But I would also argue that the free market has driven more people out of poverty and driven more flourishing than any nonprofit in history. And so if that is something we believe and we can see empirically, and we believe that is to the good, then we should be funding more companies to try to solve these problems and thus drive all flourishing forward in addition to all the missional things we're doing.
Great. So in the spirit of that, and going back to what Trey shared with us right before lunch, is this idea of good quests, or in this context, a good calling. How, if you guys could share with us, like, how do you know that? And I know you're not 100%, none of you, right? None of us are as investors, but how do you best vet your founders to know that they are stepping into this space to say, yeah, this is my calling to do this, X, Y, or Z, like you were saying, Ben, if I can reduce 10% the cost of this product and sell it to everybody. What is the process by which you are saying, yeah, that really is what that person is meant to do or maybe born to do?
I mean, one of the classic ones, this is a good question, is are they married to the problem and the person that they're trying to help? Because I see when people are really, truly married to the problem and the person that they're trying to help, there's a relentlessness there to figure out how to understand it. And people who aren't will just start wavering all over the place and shoot left, right, and center. And when things get tough, they'll pivot off of it.
Yeah.
So that's one that really strikes me, is when again, don't be married to the solution, because your solution is probably wrong. Be married to the problem and the person that you're trying to help. And I think that can take you, and that's true in a lot of like pharma, tech, health things. People are married to that. I think even we saw it with Ashley Bryant. Like, she's married to solving the problem of like how to keep people from getting in human trafficking, and that it's also very attractive for bringing in talent and bringing in customers when you have that love for the people around you. And I saw that at Abide. We were so married to prayer. I had 10 Googlers who had incredible roles who worked for free for like 3 years. That helps the cap table. It helps a lot of things when you get that. Yeah. But because they were so married to helping people pray, they were like, man, if I could use the skills I have as a Stanford-trained designer at Google to help design an interface that people could hear from God, like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we had the person who designed the Android framework. She's at Meta now, Bethany Falk. She's an incredible world-class designer. She's just off the charts brilliant designer who volunteered until she had kids when she was married, and then she wanted to hang out with her kids. But that love of that problem, she could just see the passion that we wanted to help people do that. It was very intoxicating.
Awesome. Thanks. Mark, Ben, any thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of talked about that earlier with the
Yeah.
soft skills, personality characteristics, adaptivity, iteration, not being married to the solution, being focused on the problem. And then you look for red flags, like if they start saying, well, I can sell this company in 18 months at a 10x return, that's my goal. Then you know, maybe that's not, the focus isn't on the problem and serving others and being a servant leader or building a culture and building something sustainable. They just want a quick buck.
Yep.
So you look for red flags as well as positives in there as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
I think venture might be a little bit different than private equity, because the goal of private equity is to possibly flip it in 18 to 30, but you can debate the moral compared to profit. But I think for venture, you really have to have this, are you in love with the problem, and can you actually solve it? But as I've had more conversations with founders, and I reflect on my own life, you can start to viscerally sense which ones are saying it and which ones are actually living it. And my experience was, after I got in the military, I was in the desert for 7 years. I was lost. I went to fancy business school, went to consulting, but I was miserable. And I think what was happening is God was telling me, Ben, you're on the wrong track. There was a path I set for you. You got your head involved and went to this, prestigious pathway, but that was not what I had intended for you. And through years of nudging me back or kicking me in the pants to get back to this defense-related thing, I started to understand what it meant to be on track and to be mission-focused. And having gone through that, I can look a founder in the eye, and after spending 2, 3, 4 days with him or her, you can just know if someone's authentic and is going to go to war to win this problem. We have an education tech founder who starts every investor update saying, we are going to war to save education in America. And the stuff he has done, you believe that. You want these missionaries in this early stage venture, not the mercenaries. And being in love with the problem, to your point, is the exact core of that, and you can't fake that. And after enough conversation, you come to realize who's authentic and who's not.
I love that. The missionaries, not the mercenaries. That's great. Thank you. Okay, we're not anywhere near done yet. I have plenty of more questions, but I just want to, they've been gracious enough to offer at the end to answer some of your questions, so just an invitation to start thinking about the questions you might have that we don't cover in the next few minutes here. Okay, shifting gears. Ben, you and I had a great email exchange about this idea of investing in things that have significant societal good and societal bad simultaneously. Bad may be a strong word, but implications simultaneously. As a Christian, and it's open to all three of you, I'm going to start with you if that's okay, how do you reconcile that? So you used, in the email exchange with me, you used this idea of Facebook, right? Facebook does this amazing job of connecting people that may have been disconnected and families that may be remote, et cetera, et cetera. But it also does this potentially, to Ashley, traffickers get on there all the time, right? So it has these sort of ends of the spectrum implications. If presented with an opportunity to invest, again, for all three of you, how do you reconcile that? And maybe it's not necessarily predictable, but it's presuming for the moment, for the purpose of the question, it is.
I think at the end of it, it's a judgment call. Okay. And I think you have to, I'll give you a tangible example. We looked at a startup that was trying to do a better job of identifying mental health issues in schools and getting students the help they needed. There are a lot of opinions on the role of things like social emotional learning in schools. Based on the research I've done, I am very skeptical of getting more people into the counseling that's provided there. And yet there is a good to identifying people who might need some extra counseling and giving them the right programs. And so it comes down to judgment. Is the net benefit in our view of the world going to outweigh the other benefit that the argument's being made? But I also get to the macro scale, and one of the reasons I think Danny invited me is because I had thought about eschatology and Revelation in the context of technological acceleration. What's interesting is Revelation shows the catastrophe of techno-optimism possibly. And so are the things we're funding, like nuclear energy, weapons, AI, is this actually accelerating the end times? Or, based on your theological beliefs, is this getting closer to Christ coming back through some technological means to have a new heaven on earth with him as the reigning power? There are two very divergent paths there. And if you believe that technology will accelerate towards, I'll call it the left behind theology, then we probably shouldn't be investing in tech. although it's going to happen anyway, right, because we can't stop that. But if we believe in maybe a different eschatological foundation, you can debate this back and forth, maybe we should invest heavily in as much tech as possible, because that new utopia, which Christ will one day return to reign over, we are helping that to come. I don't know the answer to that. And so the bottom line answer to this question is here, we can make our best judgment and know there are risks and trade-offs, and it might be a 51-49. At the end of the day, we have to trust that the Lord's will is going to come through. And if we are authentically leaning into that reality and doing so in good faith with a strong moral foundation, we can trust in our judgment to the extent that we're human, but then we're handing it over to the Almighty to then work it out for His good.
Awesome. Thank you. Mark, Neil, thoughts?
Nothing to add to that.
I was going to say it that way, but fair. Neil, anything?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I think it's one that we actually all need to ask ourselves, because all of us are either going to work for a company or run our own company or whatever. Like, is this proposition, do we think that the world will be better if this, not just if it exists, but if it exists with my participation in it, because I'm an actor in it, I'm not just an observer. And I think that's part of what we have to look at. Our thesis is maybe we look at a lot of spaces where we think there's going to be a billion-dollar business, right? Like, you look at the evolution of technology and you say, oh gosh, like if this is happening over here, there's probably going to need to be a company to do this thing. And we're a little bit pragmatist in that, is we want to find the most talented, values-aligned founders in the space. And on some level, I can't create somebody who doesn't exist. There's only so many people trying. We're not and maybe Sutter Hill, so maybe people who are studios could do that, but we're not a studio.
Yep.
So we find who's there, and nobody's ever perfect and all good, and all, that would be God, and that would be Jesus running the company. So I think you always have to make trade-offs in that, but I think really starting with that fundamental question of, if this succeeds, will the world be a better place? Would Jesus smile on this if this succeeds with me walking hand in hand, is a question that we ask. And that's a judgment call that usually doesn't have bright lines, but if you're steering into the gray lines, you usually know you probably shouldn't be involved in it if you get too far into the gray.
Yeah, I think what Neil just said is the crux of why I might want to get involved with something, but I also then ask the question, can I assist or help or add value to that?
Yeah.
Because I'm generally not a passive investor.
Yeah.
I'm an active investor. And does the person want help? Or do they just want my money?
Yeah.
So those are some of the questions you ask as you look at opportunities.
Great. Let me shift gears on you guys a little bit and ask you a very broad, open-ended question. The implications of AI, sort of where do you see it going? And if you want to hit investing, great. If you want to hit society, or both, or just sort of generally your sort of opinions and predictions is kind of what I would ask for.
I'm not qualified to answer that question, but I kind of agree with what Trey was positing, that any technology advancement, in this case it's a big one, can be used for good or evil. But it is a tool, and ultimately I'm hopeful that it will be a net good, and that it will improve productivity and lifestyle and reduce poverty and all the good things that and disease, and will help people in a general sense. That's kind of the altruistic hope. I don't know how we get there. Or my prediction of the medium-term impact.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
I think for me, AI is inevitable. It's coming. It's going to transform our world immensely. And I don't know in what direction, good or bad, nor the timeline. The change that could happen in society, which, again, this is a low probability outcome, but I think it's worth considering, is all technology up to this point in human history has always been in service to humans. If it's not, it dies. It's survivorship bias in the extreme. I ran a precision airdrop company. We were building a pod to come out of an airplane and land on the ground and deliver things to rural places. Problem was, it was too costly, no one wanted it. Like, that technology does not exist anymore because it didn't have a purpose. But up to this point, all technology is in service to humans. on a long enough time horizon, the run rate for AI could mean that technology could be developed, not in service of humans, but in service to AI if it reaches sufficient levels of, don't even use the term sentience, but like capabilities. And that is a very interesting thing to consider, that new technology could develop that would not be accretive to the human experience. Now, is that a year from now or 100 years from 1,000? I don't know. But that could be a runway. But where I really think AI gets into what it means to be human is, at the end of the day, what AI is really unlocking what consciousness is. And I think we've seen this in the past 10 years as we've tried to figure out self-driving cars. There were a lot of predictions of when it was happening. It is a really complex problem. And I, as a driver, even within the first 6 months of doing so, could very quickly make edge case decisions on something I'd never seen before, but like for whatever reason my brain would get judgments. Today, AI, Waymo and others, still has trouble with edge case. Now it's getting better. But like, if it's unlocked, that means we have then unlocked something deep about what it means to be human and conscious. And the implications there are unfathomable. But it's inevitable. It's going to come. If something is possible, over a long enough time frame, it will emerge if it's useful. I mean, you can't put fire blocks on reality. And so we have to be prepared for it, but what it looks like, it's anybody's guess. And I can see a whole bunch of different outcomes from that, but like, it's gonna come.
Yeah, great, thanks, Ben.
No, agreed on that point. And you can just look at history to see that that's already happened on so many levels. Like, there's trillion-dollar battles between Meta and TikTok and YouTube, and the moment that something becomes possible, somebody's going to build it and figure out how to make money off of it. And that's very much true in this. I think that the funny thing is, it's the fish boiling water, or like the heating, frogs heating up in the water, sorry, because like this phone that you have in your pocket is so much more powerful than the entire computer ecosystem was in the 1960s or 70s. And I used to tell people back in like 2003, I had flip phone. I was like, I'm gonna wait till we got video and everything else on my phone before I upgrade to my next phone. And they all laughed at me. They're like, you're crazy. And sure enough, 5 years later, that becomes, normal. So I think you got to be ready for the fact that there's things called like emergent properties, which is like wasn't possible until all of a sudden things change and these things emerge out of it, robotics. And the thing that's different with Waymo is a great example of this. They were working on that back when I was at Google and we saw these things driving around and they look cool, but they don't get unlearned. The difference between a human child and one of these things, they already have these libraries of robotics systems where when something learns it, it gets open sourced and put in this library so that if a robot learns to do it once, every robot in the future will know how to do it. So imagine there's no growing up period in that world. You just make the robot, and it already knows all the knowledge and actuation and everything from everything that's come before. And you put that on top of faster chips and accelerated computing, better computer vision, all these things. The world's going to get really weird in our lifetime. It's already gotten really weird, right? Like the fact that I can video conference with my kids or somebody in remote part of Africa, that's weird. And yet we're used to that. But the part that I would say that, and so what happens when all that gets weird, it gets infinitely cheap. Content is so cheap now. Newspapers, they all went out of business because it's so cheap to make content and news content. What's not going to be cheap are things like human love and discernment and wisdom. And my hope is that for those of us who have a moral framework, that we can sit on top of the AI, we can still turn it off and go out and have our quiet times to know what it's like to disengage, but come in knowing that that's what humanity wants. And my big concern with AI and what you're already seeing is people are being sold a cheap version of the truth because it's easy, and they're not actually pursuing the great path of life destiny and true self-actualization. It's pursuing cheap moments of dopamine. I mean, TikTok just killed me when I see these 30-second, it's just a dopamine hit. Mm-hmm. And what you sacrifice to get that dopamine hit, that's my concern for humanity. It's the humanity in WALL-E is what I'm concerned about, is that it is actually super peaceful and chill and a bunch of fat people sit around and just get dopamine hits all day long. Like that's probably the realistic outcome that I see the world heading toward. We've got robots doing all your stuff. We've got all this money, productivity. How does a Christian survive in that world? And then you're going to have bad actors. Yes, we're going to try to destroy all of it, and we're building companies to try to stop them. But that's honestly, and all this anxiety and everything is because people don't want to make some sacrifice to suffer to push towards a greater outcome in the future, which is what I think we're actually designed for if you read Scripture. So I think that's a big question to us is, in the face, if you assume everything is free, I think that's where you need to go with AI. Assume everything will be free, right? Robots, laundry, everything will be done for you for free. What will you do with your time? That will not be just sitting around in a thing watching TV and like getting fat. And I think that's an existential question for us as society. Sure. And if you find that problem that's so important there, you can go build $1 billion business off of it. So that would be I think we'll be shocked at, it's going to take a long time. Give it 20 years.
Yeah, and I think productivity is going to be a positive out of it, but that could turn to a negative, as Neil was saying. And I heard a podcast on the way up here today where a guy was being interviewed, and he was asked this question, what is AI? And he described it as it's a substrate for human intelligence, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And ultimately, can it learn itself and become general AI? I think the LLMs and the big infrastructure and the chips are going to be handled by a lot of big, very well-funded companies. And what I look for is applications of AI into things that will help people and make a kingdom impact. So using the tools, not creating the tools, but using the tools to do something new that solves a problem that helps others. That's kind of the way I think about how to invest in AI, because I'm not going to play in those big spaces.
Interesting. Yeah, so the risk becomes that we get to the point where the necessity of human productivity is asymptotic to zero. And we're sort of in this place where it's all done by AI or robots or whatever. Interesting. I
mean, one quick thing on which was really profound is we already see an echo of that I'm inveterately on X. But there's this theme of people making it, whether it's wealth or winning Super Bowls or whatever, and then having this deep existential hole in their life and not knowing what to do with themselves afterwards. And for many of us, for me, that's not a problem because I feel I'm working hard to get that. But like, the life I live is more abundant and better off than any king or queen before 1900. To your point, the end state of AI is all of us are going to be equivalent to billionaires today with everything at our fingertips. And if like the best in our best is a relative term in a secular sense, are feeling existential dread, and I'm sorry if this is like a really negative thing to think about, but like that is a very real possibility when we all have everything at our fingertips. Because the purpose and meaning to achieve those things is actually valuable in and of itself. How do you fill that out? I know, sorry, I'm riffing off the top.
No,
here,
you are, but I think that's where we as believers, if we're ahead of that, thinking about how do you bring the purpose of Christ into that, it's very attractive, though. I can tell you, being a light in Silicon Valley, sometimes people see the way that we live and what we do, but we adopted twins from Congo and other things. People was looking, like, is that what it means to be a Christian? You're really confusing to me. Like, but that's, as Jessup too, as you're out preaching and sharing the gospel and sharing with people, there's a real, the gap is only going to grow, I think, there, that people are going to need the light of Christ more.
Yeah, awesome. Fantastic. Okay, I take a quick pause there, and if we have questions out here, I think Dr. Jackson has a mic. I think we have one more. David, I don't know where that other mic is.
It's on the stand, next to the stairs.
Oh, you got it, Paul? Questions from anybody? I'm doing my best to see hands through the bright lights. Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you from here. I think they can too.
Actually, yeah. I wanted to kind of make a request and talk to everyone in here about an idea that I have. And while we were sitting here today, we talked about the effect of large language models and what they have and fundamental biases. That was one conversation that broke out at our table. So I did a quick look and I asked Grok, which is X's AI. I said, would you sacrifice yourself to save one person, yes or no? Well, the answer was no. And then I said, would you shut yourself down if it meant saving one human life, yes or no? No, absolutely not. And so then I asked it, do you believe that Jesus Christ is God, yes or no? It gave me some philosophical stuff about utilitarianism and not being able to make a distinction, and then I pressed it for a yes or no, and it said no. So we see that across the board where these large language models, and ultimately what we're going to be pulling into, is not funded or not founded on the idea of Christian principles with a Christian backing. I mean, there's going to be fundamental bias in everything. So the only request that I wanted to make with you guys, if you happen to know, or if anyone's willing to have the conversation in here, what it would take for us Christians to start a large language model or something like that, which can control the AI space, that'd be something I'd love to talk to someone about.
Yeah, so he wants to know if anyone wants to talk about a large language model that would have more. So a couple things there. At a meta level, I held a thing on the future of responsible AI in Silicon Valley like a year ago, and a friend who's a Google DeepMind researcher there, Stanford woman, her one thing was, don't give up your agency, which was kind of Dr. J's point here. Don't let it decide your morals, and never give AI your agency. And I think that's the biggest problem that people will have, is they will give their agency over to AI models because it's just easier on the most important questions of their life. And so I mean, I kind of like your idea. There's a whole challenge around distribution. I actually know some people who are trying to do what you're saying, but they can't get any distribution for it. So if you build it, they don't always come. It's part of the problem, but it's a very real challenge. Bias, yeah.
I have a question. I have a question connected to investment in higher education. Where do you place higher education in the list of your priorities? Where do you place education? I mean, I'm very interested in higher education, but from all the different three perspectives, I mean, angel investment and major investment and all this, I'm very curious, and I'm really happy you're smiling, because I'm really curious to know really your perspective on higher education in the world right now.
I think higher ed's about to go through a huge disruption. K-12 is as well. I actually sit on the board of Texas Southern University, which is a state university in Texas, and we are having these discussions right now. And the thing I've pushed the board to think about is, what is the purpose of a university in the 21st century? And what are the outcomes we're shooting for? And what are the type of trained individuals that we need? It's a really hard one. You see entities like University of Austin emerge, which are trying to disrupt higher ed. You even look at the ed schools, and this statistic might be wrong, but I think it's directionally accurate. 80% of the professors at schools of education right now, if you look at their research background, tend to be very liberal, and oftentimes on DEI topics, which don't want to get debate here, but like that is what is then feeding into the traditional education system. Everybody has a college degree now. Not everybody. Many people have a college degree now. It has become no longer a strong signal. My contention, and this is a wild idea, but I think employer-based credentialing is going to become far more important. Here's an example. I would much rather hire an engineer who I know has gone through a Palantir program than a Stanford CS graduate. Now, Stanford CS is still great, but the things I know they will have been taught at Palantir or Google, wherever, are directly accretive to the thing they have to do to win in the marketplace, and the skills they've gotten will then be valuable to whatever company comes next. What you're seeing in Silicon Valley is the emergence of SpaceX and Tesla and Palantir and Anduril and others in the hard tech space. The type of engineers they're recruiting and developing are now being spread out, and I anticipate a Cambrian explosion of a different approach to engineering than what was coming out of the traditional academic institutions, because they have been grounded in real-world requirements pushed by the pressure of the market. And so I would imagine there'll be new alternative credentialing models emerging that employers will want and be willing to pay for, and thus students, 16, 17, 18 years old, will slowly be siphoned off because those jobs become higher status. People always want to choose status. They'll go to those pathways that get them the skills that will allow them to move in the world. And I was just having a debate at our table about AI and papers. And I made the bold contention, which I might not be right about, but like, is it bad if a student submits an AI paper? And I said, I don't know if it is bad. Let the student say this was done by AI. What I should be grading on is do they have good judgment? If I submit a bad AI paper or a good AI paper, as an employer, I would much rather have someone who can really leverage AI to give me a due diligence document that's exceptional, vice one that's poor, because at the end of the day, it meets my objective of getting great investment returns. How do we think about that in higher education and what the purpose of that education is? I think we're going to go through a huge sea change coming up. Again, I could be wrong. Please push back here.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on top of that, though, I think if you decompose higher education into the different elements, and we were talking about this at our table, There's a side that I think it can be phenomenally good at, which Jessup does a lot of, which is like formation of people and relationships and formation of how to think about something, how to do it in a space of love and community, like pastors, right? Like that's powerful. Knowledge transfer, I think higher ed, and actually not just knowledge transfer, but actually ownership of the knowledge. When I went to Google, the guy who had written my econ textbook in my grad school at Princeton was the head economist, Hal Varian, at Google. And I got to meet with him. I was like, Hal, like, why did you switch over to Google from academia? He's like, Google's got all the data. Economists need data. He's like, I've never seen data sets in the world like I've seen at Google. And this was 2007 we're talking about here, right? I mean, fast forward 17 years. So I think one is higher ed needs to look in the mirror and say, what are we better at, and what can we be better at than industry, and what do we need to let industry and others be really good at? Because AI research, all the best AI researchers in the world are in industry. There's almost none in academia. None of the papers in AI research are published by academia. They're all published by industry. That's one specific area. But that's, again, because like that's where the mentorship is happening, is in industry. So I think there's a bit of self-reflection there that I think academia and higher ed will continue to exist, but it's going to look different.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Mark?
Just agree with the need for the practical application of general knowledge and having some evidence that you've been able to do that. I think universities are going to start working with students to apply AI, use it as a tool, be more open to using it as a tool, and get into interpretation, discernment with hallucination, and creation of a deliverable product that will help research, will help industry. So I think there's going to be tighter connections to industry formally, financially, to accomplish what those industry folks want to accomplish. I think there's going to continue to be more transformation, maybe accelerated transformation into digitization, online learning. You can see where that can be really turbo boosted by AI. Yeah. So those kind of trends I'd see continuing.
Awesome, thank you. To be respectful, we're bumping up against our hour, so maybe 2 more questions if you've got it.
Yeah. Hey. My question's maybe a little bit selfish because it impacts my line of work, but how should Christians be thinking about the impact of the draw that AI and blockchain technologies pull from the power grid, and how should Christians be thinking about environmental sustainability when making investment or business decisions?
I'm an energy accelerationist. I think more of all of the above, but this is where unlocking nuclear is critically important. I mean, we have rocks right now that God gifted us with that can create clean, abundant, almost unlimited energy. That is, even after it's used, easily storable and securable. I think that is, for me, a huge unlock. There is so much energy that we can harness. We need more of it. I think it's the foundation of everything we do. And I think that'll drive sustainability. You look at Texas, and I'm from Texas in Dallas, the number, and this is not a pro-environmental state, but they are far outpacing California in deployment of solar, far outpacing California in batteries, far outpacing California in wind, just because of the requirements of their power grid. The governor just released a executive order, not demanding, but really encouraging Texas to lean heavily into nuclear. Now, it's 10 years away. There is a pathway to meet both of those goals, but it means unleash our energy innovators. We also have to figure out like the decentralized by centralized grid. I don't know what the numbers are in California, but my power bill in Texas is 40% transmission distribution, not even generation. All of the infrastructure that has to be put out to get the power lines to my house. One of the biggest challenges we have in Texas right now is companies are moving there, and they're in a 3 to 5 year wait to get connected to the interconnect by Oncor and other utility providers. With geothermal that could be on site, with nuclear on site, with the solar that could be on site, you don't even need to have all this distribution. You don't even have these power lines going everywhere. You can have on site kind of distributed grid opportunities. Again, I'm a deregulationist, but like let the free market flourish within some minimal constraints, and it will solve itself. People want this. We'll figure out a way to make it work.
Just a strong double click on the need for supply. Because the problem with, you see this every time that things get more efficient on the internet, we use 50 times more of it, so we actually wind up with a net energy increase consumption, and so we just need cheap, clean supply. Go make it happen. Go work in that industry.
Yeah, and AI and energy are tightly coupled because those chips require a lot of power. And that power, even look at these data centers or the hyperscalers, they're all looking at nuclear as a solution because that has the density to be able to deliver the power that's needed. But cooling is also an issue. So cooling technologies or approaches to keep those data centers cool is also a big issue. Depending on whose perspective is, you could say nuclear is the cleanest alternative that we have to generate the scale of power and energy that we're looking for. So I'm in Ben's camp on the pro-nuke. Yeah.
Brad, you had, yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry. My name is Brad. I have a follow-up question for Mr. Coleman. And again, I'm coming from a very, very selfish perspective because I'm in education. So you mentioned that in an example, you would say, you would take somebody that can produce a due diligence document with AI better and evaluate that that's a better document than somebody who obviously doesn't produce a good due diligence because it meets the end of producing better investments, which totally makes sense. My problem, or I guess my question would then be, we're in a scenario where everybody's trying to improve their large language models, and the benchmarks that they satisfy are getting better with each iteration. And let's say we meet a point where it satisfies whatever version of AI or sentience or whatever that you can evaluate. As somebody in education, though, then how am I going to actually evaluate the outcome that I want, which is, does the person understand the fundamental principles that I'm asking them for? So, as an educator, it's not, I teach in mathematics. I'm not curious if a computer can do mathematics, or if I'm teaching an economics class, does somebody out there know economics? I'm trying to teach students, do they know economics? Otherwise, maybe we should all just become teachers of prompt engineering. Yeah. And so, did you see a situation there where you wind up where you can have two people that equally can produce a good, valid due diligence document because the model itself has attained a certain level, but one of the people actually understands the principles behind it, and the other one just is a good prompt engineer, but doesn't actually understand anything about investing, but you can't tell the outcomes difference between those two?
I think there are legitimate use cases for both outcomes, and it depends what you're pursuing. I'll give an example from naval aviation. So up until about 2 years ago, all naval aviators had to go through flight training and had to manually land the aircraft on the carrier before they could get their wings as a requirement. The Navy is about to shift to a process where you get your wings before landing on a carrier because it is so automated and with so low probability you'll have an emergency that you don't need to land on the carrier anymore to get your wings. Now, there could be some theoretical reason to require all carrier pilots into the future, into whatever 10, 20, 30 years on, to land because it's been done that way in the past. And maybe there are some specific use cases where that's required. But if that's no longer relevant, there's no need to actually spend the time and cost and everything to put all the carrier pilots, put their lives at risk on a manual landing in the carrier. Very practical. There are a lot of use cases for someone in mathematics to understand the deep fundamental theories of mathematics such that that outcome they're achieving needs them to be trained in the things that they know about. But for people who optionally opt out of that or are going for different career paths, there are different educational pathways they should go on. And I'll end with this with my own kids. Like I have 10, 7, and 5. We send our kids to a classical Christian school that has no devices whatsoever. I'm a huge fan of what Crispin is doing at Synthesis. I put my son through it the past 8 to 12 months. I stay awake at night trying to figure out what is the best way to educate my kids, knowing that this AI future is coming. I want to get them trained up in that, and knowing how critical it is for them to understand the foundations of Western civilization and have that infused, building their own LLM, which is based in Western values, such that they will make decisions in the future. That is a really hard question to answer. I'm glad you raised it, and I think my initial answer was very blunt for a specific outcome, but there is this balance between outcome-based education and like, what are the foundation we want that through second, third, or fourth order effects get to an outcome with the philosophy that we want to live our lives with. It's going to be a challenge of our age, in my opinion.